Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show Curtis Poe, who, as you will hear from his accent, is an American, but he's lived in 5 countries. Currently, he's based in France. He's been researching and writing about American expats. In fact, I discovered Curtis because of an article he wrote about people giving up their U.S. citizenship. So, Curtis, let's jump into this issue. Is it true, in fact, that Americans are choosing to give up their citizenship more and more these days?
So I was just looking at the Federal Register report where American renunciations are being reported. And for the May report in 2016, almost 1,200 Americans had renounced their citizenship. In 2008, there were an average of 58 Americans giving up citizenship a quarter. So that's an increase of about 20 times over what we had in 2008. And if you look at the graph of Americans renouncing over time, it's been rising sharply ever since then.
So are they doing this because, as people in America might think, people, real good patriots, are they giving up their citizenship because they just want to dodge taxes?
No. So the IRS likes to deny this issue. The State Department's been fairly forthright about it. It's the FATCA law. I've talked to many expats about this. I've interviewed many. I've been to a number of conferences and I've met them face to face. And it's very hard when you meet someone and they're crying because they've had to give up their citizenship, which is part of what they are, because they can't live abroad anymore. And so FATCA was a law passed back in 2008, which had the very laudable goal of chasing down people who were hiding money in offshore accounts. Unfortunately, the law was not very well thought through. And the idea was the United States was demanding that every foreign financial institution on the planet had to turn over to the IRS records of Americans who had bank accounts, or else any U.S. sourced income they would seize 30% of it from those if they didn't comply. Now, the problem with this is often illegal for those banks to do because they have secrecy laws to protect the people, or they often can't do it because they don't collect the citizenship information of their clients, and as a result, they're looking at spending a lot of money for no reason. And countries were frustrated by this, but the United States continued to pursue it, and many banks around the world today are simply denying banking services to Americans, saying, you can't have a bank. Or people are now being denied business opportunities. This happened to me. A company talked to me. I'm fairly well known in my field, and they wanted to hire me for a position where I would actually have signing authority over, say, buying servers or something like that. But once you do that, the United States government demands that if you have signing authority over something like that, you have to turn over all of that account financial information to the IRS. So I had this European company doing European business with no U.S. business whatsoever, saying, wait a minute, if we hire you, we have to prepare all of our financial information for this other country we have nothing to do with?
That's amazing. I'll tell you something, that's a real issue because here in Israel, a lot of times we find that people, a lot of Americans have been moving to Israel for decades, and then, they had kids, and the kids are now in their 20s, and they decide to work, let's say, for a startup company. Mm-hmm. And, that's a 3, 4, 5 friends get together, and they say, okay, you be the CEO, you be the CFO, you handle the bank. We'll all have signing, ability on the bank account to keep it honest. And then if someone knows, he goes, wait a second, but, Jacob, he's an American also. He can't have signing power, or else we're going to be spending more money in accounting fees just to file U.S. tax returns, and we have nothing to do with the United States. So what you're describing is actually a real problem that it's hurting people. And also you mentioned the difficulty of opening bank accounts. What's happening, at least in Israel, is the Israeli banks, and I think banks around the world, have to have their clients sign a W-9. But the interesting thing is, how do they even know that these clients are Americans? How do they distinguish?
What they generally do is they're looking at the names of the clients, or the bank teller might be talking to you and they might hear a strange accent, and then they ask the question. Because if the IRS finds out that, XYZ Bank has a U.S. client, not even a citizen, they could be a U.S. person, you could simply have a green card, and then you fall under this law, and the bank finds out that this bank, or the IRS finds out this bank has a U.S. client, and they've not reported that information to the IRS, then the IRS is liable to, it can withhold 30% of their income. So a lot of banks they're frustrated by this because there's no business value for the bank to turn in their customers. They don't want to do this. And here in Europe, this is a violation of European secrecy law. So to get around this, the United States government has been signing intergovernmental agreements with countries saying, okay, the banks won't give us the information. They will give it to their government. So the banks here in France will give the information to the French government, and the French government in turn will give that information to the US government, which is complete violation of the spirit of the secrecy laws, but it's not in violation of the actual letter of the law. And many banks are saying, we have to spend so much money to build compliance systems just to find out the citizenship of these people, when for us it doesn't make any sense to care about that. Some banks are simply saying, we are not going to accept U.S. citizens for money accounts. Some, it's investment accounts. Others are simply refusing U.S. citizens across the board, saying, we just don't want to deal with the pain and headache of this. So if they think you're a U.S. citizen, they will ask. And unless you can produce what's called a certificate of loss of nationality or some other proof that you are not a U.S. citizen, you lose your banking services. And here in
Guilty
Europe,
until proven non-American. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Amazing. We're talking with. Yeah, I was saying you're guilty until you can prove you're not American. We're talking with Curtis Poe, who is an American, and he's been living outside the United States for about 10 years. He writes about it, he teaches people about it, he talks about it. I'll tell you, Curtis, one of the people, and I often joke about this, who's really benefiting from these new laws is me, and I'll tell you why. Oh. Not because I find it easy to open a bank account here in Israel, but not only are the Israeli banks not refusing to service American clients, but a lot of the major U.S. brokerage firms are telling their clients who live in Israel, wait a second, you live outside the United States or you live in Israel, we can't maintain your account anymore. So my day job is that I'm a financial advisor, and I work with people who live outside the United States who want to have U.S. brokerage accounts or IRA accounts or 401k, whatever kind of account they'd have. All of a sudden they get a call from their broker in the States who may have been their broker for decades. And he says, I'm sorry, but my firm can no longer work with you. And then they come up to my step. And it's not that it's illegal for these firms to work with the people. It's just they're so, dealing with the regulations drives them crazy. So they do a business decision. They say, it's not worth it to us to maintain the accounts. Let a firm who specializes in cross-border clients deal with it, and we're going to get rid of you. Have you found that also in France?
Yes, this is definitely the case. We had one case where we applied for a car loan and they turned us down. We had no idea why. But a friend inside the bank very quietly said, it's because your husband is an American. And talking to other expats, they're facing the same problem. They can't get full banking services. I know a gentleman in Sweden, he was complaining to me about the problems he's been facing trying to convince his bank that, yes, he has gotten rid of his citizenship now, and he has to get all the documentation together to prove to them that it's safe for them to do business with him. And here in the U.S., you often have a bill day where you sit down as a dedicated day to paying bills. We don't deal with that here. I've never seen a paycheck. My money comes directly into my bank account. My bills get paid directly from my bank account. Without a bank account, you can't function in Europe. And many people are now getting trapped. In fact, marriages are getting hurt by this because you have foreign spouses of Americans who don't want their bank account information turned over to this foreign government that they've never had any business with. And it's frustrating watching this because it's getting harder and harder to be an American living abroad as these companies are beginning to consider Americans what they consider toxic assets or toxic people. They want us to go away because of the legal problems.
And the funny thing is, some people say, Americans will often say, well, good riddance, they don't want to live in the United States. But one of the things they don't realize is that the millions and millions of Americans who live outside the United States are fantastic ambassadors for America. It's not like we left America because we didn't like it. The opposite. We're very happy with America, and we do business with America, and we bring not just a few dollars of business to the United States, but, an American like you or me sets up a business outside the United States. We're sending huge amounts of business back to the United States. So it really makes it worse. Curtis, we're near the end of the time, but I want to just go back to what we started with, which was this question about renouncing your citizenship. I understand there are kind of high fees, and it is inconvenient, and it's definitely weird. Do you, as an American, growing up in America, I never thought of such a thing. But do you think it's worthwhile?
That's going to be up to each individual's position, their personal situation. If they know they're coming back to the United States, of course it's not worthwhile. If you're like me, I have a French wife, I have a daughter, I have family here in France, I have family in the UK, Germany. My life is here. It has been for a long time. I have no desire to give up my U.S. citizenship. Sooner or later, I might be put in the position of saying, well, I also have to be concerned about the financial well-being of, my family. So I pay my taxes, but because of the FEIE, I generally don't have to pay taxes to the U.S., but even if I pay my taxes, I can make a simple mistake on something called the F-bar or something called the 8938. And all of a sudden I'm facing bankruptcy-inducing fines, possible criminal penalties, and just widespread devastation to myself for making an error on new paperwork which has recently been introduced. It is so difficult to file taxes if you live overseas that Americans living back in the homeland, they would revolt if they had to deal with this. They absolutely would not put up with this. These laws would be gone very quickly. But no one cares about Americans abroad.
Right, because really it's a question of taxation without representation, because the people, we don't have congressmen anymore who really care what's going on. If you took all the Americans living overseas, that's the amount of people of a small state. We should have a congressman.
There are around 8 million people living abroad, but it's very difficult to coordinate them. It looks like they might have a high voter turnout, but this is spread across the various states, and we are generally ignored. There are a number of times, I'm not going to mention names, but I've heard politicians make promises regarding Americans overseas trying to court that vote, and those promises generally are not fulfilled. We're ignored, or we're a target
of the world of politics. Yeah.
People think that we're all billionaires sitting on our yachts lighting our Cuban cigars with $100 bills. Most of us are ordinary people. Surveys of expats, we're moms, we're pops. We've come over here, we've gotten a teaching position or a volunteer position. We're just middle class, and we're frustrated that we are now getting squeezed harder and harder by getting bank accounts denied to us, by losing job opportunities, just because there were some U.S. laws passed that they just didn't think through very carefully. Mm-hmm. And
just the cost of compliance, to hire an accountant on both sides of the ocean who understands what the issues are. Curtis, we're just about out of time, but in a few minutes I'll meet you on my yacht. We can smoke a couple of Cuban stogies. But in the last few seconds, just tell me, how, I'm kidding about the yacht, how can people follow you, learn a little bit about what you've been talking about, and learn more of the ideas that you're sharing?
I would consider that people should look at the Association of Americans Resident Abroad, AARO.com, ARO, which is a resource for helping Americans who live abroad. I have a blog that I've written to help Americans discover ways of living in other countries and exploring the world. That's overseas-exile.com. And there are many resources out there. There's Democrats abroad, there's Republicans abroad, quite a variety of groups to help people learn what it's like to explore the world. And it's wonderful out here. And I don't want people to think that just because we're having problems with the banks and jobs, that it's a bad thing to do. It is lovely. I'm quite happy here in France. But at the same time, it's getting harder.
It is getting harder. And I, too, am happy. And Israel and all the people I know also are happy. But Curtis, you're right about the difficulties. We will put a link to all of the websites you just mentioned at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com so people can find that information. Once again, Curtis Poe, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for your time, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.